Monday, June 4th, 2007. My name is Nicole Baker and I'm conducting the military interview. Kim Klein is operating the camera and Melissa Hawks created the setting. We're interviewing Gerald Parker in his home. He was born on August 21st, 1946. He served in the Army during the Vietnam War. Where were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan. And we moved to Lowell when I was at the age of 7. My father and uncle had gone together into a business, in a partnership, and they bought a gas station garage, or at that time it was just a gas station, out on the west side of town.
Can you describe your house that you moved into?
When we first moved into town, we lived up on Hudson Street in a rental house. It was an old house with a apartment upstairs, and the main floor was what we rented out, or rented. And we lived there approximately a year and a half, and then we moved up to the east side of town on Main Street. It was 1225 East Main Street. The home was bought after it had been fully remodeled. It was an old farmhouse that a gentleman from Saranac had bought and was hoping to move into, except for his wife didn't want to move into Lowell at that point in time. And so then he put it on the market, and my folks were able to buy it.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had a sister that's about approximately 19 months younger than I am, and I have a brother that's 10 years younger than I am. My sister is Elaine, and she married Dave Thomas, and my brother Joe Jr., who he was named after my dad, married Gail Warning.
Did you have any pets?
At home we had a couple dogs, and that was about it. We were concerned about the dogs getting hit by the traffic that was on 21 at the time, because there was, at that point in time, the expressway wasn't there south of Lowell, so the main thoroughfares were M21 and M57, M44, and Old 16 south of Lowell.
Where did you attend school?
I attended school when I first came to town, and attended school at Lowell Public School, and then was moved into the St. Mary's School the following year. So my sister was in kindergarten the year that I was in second grade in Lowell, and then I believe St. Mary's School started in the first grade, and that's why we were moved over there. So that's where I attended elementary school, and then high school I attended at Lowell High School. Graduated in 1965.
What did you do after high school?
Went to Grand Rapids Community College at the time, or JC, and started coursework there for accounting and bookkeeping type of activities, and went there 1 year. The latter part of, or early spring of that following year, which would have been 1966, the draft board was headed up by General Hershey. Were trying to get a lot of the people that were in college to not attend school, but to be marketable or ready for the draft. And they come up with a system of testing to see if you were able to able to qualify for the 2S deferment. And so took the test the latter part of the summer, one of the last tests in the area, and it was down at Kalamazoo College. And it was quite an extensive test. It lasted most of the day, and during that summer I got a letter saying that I didn't deserve to have my 2S deferment because I didn't score high enough on the test. So at that point in time I said to heck with it and decided to not go back to school the fall of '66. And if I would have gone back to school in the fall of '66, I would have regained my deferment, 2S deferment, and just went into college and stayed there until I got my degree. However, I decided not to go back to school. So therefore, in December of 1966, the first day of December, I was drafted into the U.S. Army.
Okay, where was your first training camp held?
When I first went into the military, after my medical physical down there in Detroit, we went from Detroit to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for intake. And there we received our shots and our clothing and duffel bag, and we were held there for maybe a week to 2 weeks at most. And probably a week, now I think back onto it. And because Fort Leonard Wood at that point in time was filled up, they didn't have any more spaces open for training. We were shipped via plane to Fort Benning, Georgia. The plane was leased by the military, and the airlines was Ozark Airlines. So it looked like something out of Will Abner. Quite an old plane, but we made it down to Georgia, and once we got down there, and then shortly thereafter, we were housed into the training unit. The training unit was at Harmony Church. There was 2 areas at Fort Benning, Sand Hill and Harmony Church, and the Harmony Church area had not been used very much since Korea War. And we were like the first or second training group to go through that area. So therefore, that's where I took my basic training.
What were the barracks like?
Barracks were the old wooden style, World War II style barracks. They had 2 floors on them, the main floor and then the upper story. And the barracks had siding on the outside and windows, but no siding on the inside or insulation or anything on the walls. It was just 2x4s and outside siding with the windows. They were heated with coal furnaces, and the hot water heater was also a coal-fired unit. The barracks were not very warm, and it was in the wintertime of 1967 that we were there, and it was quite cold that winter. It was one of the few years down there that we had snow while we were down there at the training unit, and that was kind of fun because of the fact that when they get snow in Georgia, they're not used to handling that kind of snow. We had probably 3 or 4 inches of snow, and so everything shut down that day. And we had it probably till about noon snow, and by 6, 7 o'clock at night, most of it was gone and evaporated, melted.
Did you ever get injured during training?
About 4 weeks out of graduation, we were doing some obstacle course maneuvers, and we had to go through a window, and it was a mock-up of a house, and we were supposed to clear the house and then go out through this window onto the next stage. And when I went out the window, running out to the next stage, I tripped and fell and broke my pinky finger. And I actually didn't break it, it fractured it. So ended up the next 4 weeks, I ended up with a splint on my little finger. Of course, we got an opportunity to go camping and do a lot of other things during that time, and it was somewhat uncomfortable, but we made it. What I did is I tripped on some trees that they'd hacked down with machetes, and because they had cleared out that area there for the training group, and that area had not been used in years. So there was a lot of scrub growth in that, and that's how I broke my finger. But outside of that, I made it through basic with hardly a scratch.
Where did you go after Georgia?
uh, my first set of orders coming from after basic training was for Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I don't know what it was for. They were canceled because the hospital had not released me yet for duty, complete duty. But the second set of orders that came down and I was released from duty at that point in time was for Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. That was the Army's electronics school. And I went there for a course in radar repair for 26 weeks.
After the 26 weeks in New Jersey, where did you go?
From there, after graduation there from school, I took a 30-day leave and came home. And then after 30 days, I went out and reported to the Army depot at Sacramento, California. At that point in time, I had approximately 13 months left of my 24 months of service, and that's where I spent the rest of my time, was out in Sacramento.
How come you never had to go to Vietnam?
In many ways, I was lucky. I'd come down the levee twice for Vietnam. The first time for my job, MOS, they wanted somebody that had more than a year, and at that point I had less than a year. I had something like 10 months left of service. And the second time I come down, they wanted somebody that had 6 months of service or more, and I was under 6 months. I had like 4 months to go, so never had the opportunity to go to Vietnam or anyplace else.
What did you do in California?
The depot facility was a large facility. It was similar to like a factory. The base that we were at was run by civilians. There was a colonel who was in charge of the base. However, the barracks that we stayed at on that base, and there was only one set of barracks there, hadn't been used in years. But the facility itself repaired equipment coming back from Vietnam and Korea that was either repaired there or scrapped. It was the highest echelon maintenance in the Army. And for a while we worked up in the depot facility with the civilians repairing equipment up there. And after a while we were no longer needed at the facility, and I'm sure it was because of the fact that there was the civilians in the Union and other things that were involved there at that point in time that we were no longer needed to help repair the equipment. Yeah, we seen a lot of equipment coming back from Korea and Vietnam that were in desperate need of repair from explosions and
that. How is technology different back then than it is to today?
Back then, a lot of the equipment I worked on had vacuum tubes in it yet. And some of the newer stuff, of course, was transistorized circuitry and that, but nothing like what we have today. One of the radar units that I repaired had a computer in there about the size of 2.5 foot by probably another 2.5 foot deep, and it was all electrical and mechanical devices in there. With gears and that, and they had a bank of potentiometers on there that we had to, every time we moved the unit or the weather changed, we'd have to go through with a null meter and null out these potentiometers. So, and it didn't have the computing power, well, probably a millionth of what today's home computers have. So there's a lot of changes that have taken place.
Can you describe the warehouses where you repaired the Army equipment?
Could you say that again, please?
Yeah, can you describe the warehouses where you repaired the Army equipment?
The equipment was repaired in a factory setting, and it was like a large building. And as I recall, it, of course, was heated and somewhat cool during the summertime, but, excuse me, because Sacramento would get up quite hot. It was in the Valley of California, and we'd have temperatures during the summer of 110. So very low humidity, but the heat was still there. It was very hot. But also on the base there was warehousing that was approximately a half-mile long, and there were 6 of these units. And in the warehousing that I'd seen and been in, there was a lot of different equipment for the military, trucks, jeeps, and that were all stacked up on each other, palleted, ready to go from one place to the next place, and boxes of miscellaneous equipment that had just numbers on it, so you couldn't really identify what was in those boxes, but there were a lot of equipment in those warehouses. Since that time, went to my 25th high school reunion and ran across a guy I used to go to school with and hung out with a little bit. And he's a civil engineer, and I remember talking with him about where he'd been and what he was doing and where he was at now and at that point in time. And he was at Sacramento. They had closed down that Army facility there, and he was there cleaning up the pollution that was in the ground. There was a lot of ground contamination there, primarily from trichlor, which was a cleaning agent.
How did you keep in touch with your family during your service?
Most of the time was through the telephone and through quick notes. I was never much of a writer, and still not much of a writer, even emailing. But yeah, the telephone was the primary way. I used to talk to my folks probably once every other week, and then something would occur, or something funny happened or whatever. It would be like maybe once a week. So.
How did you keep yourself entertained?
Read a lot. Learned to smoke cigarettes. And shot a lot of pool. We didn't really play too many sports or that, but like football or baseball or that. But every now and then there would be a softball game or something like that, pick up. And when I first went into the service there, I made like $72 a month, so there wasn't a lot of money to go to the EM club and have much to drink. So, you know, reading, watching a little television, just sitting around talking with people too.
Were there any funny instances in the barracks that you remember?
Not really, because we were such a small unit that we were called the 513th Light Equipment Maintenance Company, and we were just a company with 4 platoons, and those platoons were made up of people from all the branches of the military or Army, as far as like chemical engineers and people from the Signal Corps, like myself. But we were a small unit, and nobody really messed around too much because it was too easy to get a call. We had too many sergeants there. We had a lot of E6s and E7s, so we kept it pretty low. Outside of the occasional guy coming in that had too much to drink or couldn't hold his liquor or that. But yeah, well, no, it was pretty quiet.
What was the highest rank that you achieved?
Um, the highest rank was Spec 5, E5, and that was approximately 6 months before I got out. And that was due to the fact that I was able to get that much rank was because of my job was high demand, and it just happened to be a lot of rank came down for that particular MOS or military occupation. So, um, but I made E5.
Do you remember any particular people that you met during the Army?
Met a lot of different people in the service there. When you're forced to live with people that you would not normally associate with or um, would only want to meet in passing, and you have to live with these people, then you learn to tolerate a lot of different things when you're in that setting. I remember there was a gentleman from Missouri that his folks had a dairy farm, and he had a picture of his favorite cow that was hung in his wall locker. And he had a frontal, side, and back view of this cow. So you meet all kinds of people. Some had their favorite pets or horses or whatever, and pictures, girlfriends, of course, but then there were some that just didn't have any girlfriends, they just had their pets.
Nowadays, do you keep in touch with people you met in the Army?
There's one guy I keep in touch with that we talk about once a year. He lives up in Seattle, Washington. Um, his name is Jerry Mulder, and we called him Dutch when we were in the service. That was his nickname. And he pretty nice guy.
What did you do after your service had ended?
When I got out of service, I came home and excuse me, I bummed around for about a year, collected unemployment, and the economy at that time wasn't really booming very much. Jobs were a little difficult to come by. Not that you couldn't find them, it's just that they were not out there real easy to find. And so I worked for a sheet metal, ended up working for a sheet metal company after that year down near Kalamazoo, a little town called Parchment. And we made hoods for commercial kitchens down there.
Did you ever go back to college?
I worked there about a year, then I went back to school. Went back to JC and used my GI Bill and got my associate's degree in arts. And what my intent at that point in time was to go back and become a shop teacher, like in a high school setting. There was some need for that at that point in time, and that's what I was heading for. However, after the second year of school, I took a summer job at General Motors. It was a diesel equipment division at that time, Burton and Burlingame. And I worked in their dynamometer area. It was called engineering testing. And so that summer there, I worked in what they call the free running garage. And after the time elapsed for me to go back to school, they asked if I would like to stay down there. But General Motors at that point in time had a requirement that if you worked there during the summer under a summer student program, then you couldn't get a full-time job there. But nevertheless, they tried to keep me on there. And the experience from had worked at my father's gas station garage gave me the ability to work there, and was able to qualify for that job. But anyway, as it turned out, I couldn't stay there, but they did get me a job at 36th Street, which is still a General Motors facility. But I guess they just couldn't fill a slot. They had several slots open there, but at that point in time, General Motors was starting to pull back, must be. And that's back in '72. So, that, thinking back now, that must be when General Motors started pulling back some of their jobs. But anyway, I ended up at 36th Street there at Fisher Body, Plant 1, metal fabrication, and I worked there approximately a year and a half. Was laid off in the first energy crisis of 1974. It was in January when I got laid off. And was laid off from there and ended up back at Diesel Equipment Division in April on an area hire. They were hiring people back to work at Diesel Equipment, and was offered a job there and took it. And when Fisher stayed there, when Fisher Body did call me back, I said no, thank you. I'll stay where I'm at, and then, therefore I stayed there and ended up putting 34 years in for General Motors, or what was General Motors / Delphi, and all the changes that occurred.
What year did you retire?
I retired last year in September of '06 with 34 years.
How did you meet your wife?
My wife and I met in Lowell, and this is shortly, I think at the time, I was working at in Kalamazoo at Parchment, and a buddy of mine was due to get out of service within 4 to 6 months of when I first met her, but I started hanging around with her younger brother. His name was Dave Rogers, and we met my wife through a friend of his. Her friend's name was Terry Kingsley, and her and Terry were cruising through Lowell, and that was back when we could buy gas a little cheaper and we could do things like that. And we were cruising through town, and that's how I met my wife. Of course, at first she couldn't stand me, but because of the fact that that luck would have it, we were just kept meeting each other and due to friends and acquaintances and whatever have you. We just kept meeting each other, and I guess we grew on each other, and we started dating.
When were you married?
August 7th, 1971. We were married out here at St. Pat's in Parnell.
Do you have any kids?
I've got 3 children. Denise, who is 30. Sean, who is 27. Yeah, because she'll be 31. 20. Yeah, it must be 27. And then Jerry Jr., who just turned 22. And Denise is married to been married for about 5 years to a guy that's in service right now in the Army. And he's down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and they're due home the latter part of June this month. He's home for 30 days, and then he's going to Korea for a year. He's always had 2 stints in Iraq, and now he's going to Korea. my middle boy just got married here this spring, and he's married to Dawn Metternich, and my youngest is not married yet.
Do you have good or bad memories of your military experience?
My overall memories of the military is pretty good because of the fact that where I went and what I did was interesting, and I didn't have a lot of major problems. Didn't see any combat, didn't see anything that was any nastiness is what's usually attributed to the military, particularly at that point in time, to when you were forced into it. Not like today when you don't have the draft, but so most of my memories are pretty good. While I was at Sacramento, we did funeral details, and my main job there was as a pallbearer, honor guard, and so I got to see a lot of Northern California and Lake Tahoe and Reno, and because our group there, we covered halfway from San Francisco to Sacramento, and all of Northern California. So I got to see a lot of pretty country out there. And I don't know how many funeral details I was on. I stopped counting after 100. So there was several, as you can see.
Did the Army influence you after the service, or did your family have more impact on your life?
I think my family had more of an impact on my life, but there again, it's the things you kind of grow up with as far as when you're doing a job, you end up sticking with the job till the job's complete, and whether you like it or not, or whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable. Because when I was in the Army, you were drafted, and it was very difficult to quit. Like today, if you were working at a job, if you don't like what's going on, you can quit and move on to the next job. But when you're in a family or setting or in the military, like I was during the draft, it's very difficult to quit. So, but the stick-to-itiveness.
Can you tell us what everything on the jacket stands for?
This is the jacket that I was in the Army with, and I came home with. I don't have my pin for good conduct or my marksmanship medal available, but this is the patch for the Army group that I was with out in California. All on the West Coast wear that. I'm not sure how far west it also goes, but I know in California this was the patch we had. And this is the rank, my insignia rank, Specialist 5th, and that's about it for my jacket. It was hanging in the back of my closet. My daughter had used it for, I believe, Halloween. So.
When was this picture taken?
That picture was taken just before we started basic training. So I probably hadn't been in service more than 4 weeks probably at that point. Probably closer to 2 weeks at that point. So I had my fresh haircut and my brand new clothes that the Army got, and shoes and everything else. And so that was a picture that they took of us and sent home to our parents.
Okay, thank you for the interview.
Sure.
The following oral military history project is a series of documentaries in association with the Lowell area men and women who proudly served and sacrificed part of their lives to preserve the opportunities for all of us to build our businesses and raise our families under a blanket of freedom. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-5500. 7688.